In the grandeur of Elizabethan England, Queen Elizabeth I stood as an emblem of sovereignty, intellect, and the cultivated mystique of royalty. Her image was carefully curated. An eternal virgin queen, a patron of the arts, the divine embodiment of national pride. History remembers her for her dazzling court, the defeat of the Spanish Armada, and the rise of England as a Protestant superpower. But behind this legacy, beneath the layers of pearl-draped silk and powdered elegance, lay a monarch driven by fear, vanity, and the meticulous control of perception. At a time when cleanliness was more ritual than science, Queen Elizabeth I's personal hygiene habits were, by modern standards, deeply surprising. They were not simply a reflection of her era, but an extension of her deliberate political image. In a world where rulers were expected to appear more divine than flesh, the Queen cultivated a body not to be touched by water or by time. Today, we examine 5 of the most unusual and revealing hygiene customs associated with Elizabeth I. Each one is a glimpse into the extremes she undertook to preserve her myth, even as her body betrayed her. Queen Elizabeth I's dazzling court was filled with wit, poetry, and splendor, but her obsession with sugar was perhaps its most bitter irony. In an age when refined sugar was a rare and extravagant import, locked away in chests and counted like jewels, Elizabeth indulged in it with royal abandon. She adored candied violets, sugar-drenched marzipan, preserved fruits, and other elaborate confections served at her court. To possess sugar was to possess power, and she consumed it as if consuming England's rising wealth itself. Unfortunately, dental hygiene in the 16th century was primitive at best and tragically misguided at worst. The Queen is believed to have used a sweetened paste made of sugar and herbs to clean her teeth. This practice, rather than protecting her smile, accelerated decay. Abrasive powders combined with sugar merely wore down the enamel and invited rot. By the 1590s, foreign ambassadors noted that Elizabeth's teeth had turned black, and several had fallen out entirely. Her breath, according to the herbalist John Gerard, was foul enough to cause discomfort to those near her. Some even reported difficulty understanding her speech because of the missing teeth. Despite this, she adamantly refused the painful extractions urged by her physicians. In one case, a courtier underwent a tooth pulling in front of her simply to prove that the operation was survivable. Even more curious was the ripple effect of her decaying smile. Noble women in her court began darkening their own teeth to mimic her appearance, using soot and charcoal. The fashion of blackened teeth emerged not out of beauty, but as a symbol of wealth and imitation of the monarch. In the hierarchy of Tudor England, even visible decay could be aspirational, so long as it was the Queen's. Among the many phrases attributed to Queen Elizabeth I, one of the most enduring is, "I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not." While its authenticity is still debated, it captures the spirit of an era that viewed water not as a cleanser but as a threat. To bathe frequently was to invite illness, disrupt the balance of bodily humors, and risk exposure to bad air or miasma, which was believed to be a carrier of disease. For Elizabeth, bathing was not a part of daily life. Instead, she followed a regimen that involved frequently changing her linen shifts, undergarments worn against the skin, sometimes multiple times a day. These garments were believed to draw out impurities and keep the body clean through contact alone. To her contemporaries, this was considered not only sufficient but admirable. Instead of soap and water, Elizabeth preferred rosewater, vinegar rinses, and complex herbal infusions created by her apothecaries. These were applied delicately by her attendants, meant not only to refresh but to protect in the absence of running water. Such measures were regarded as the safest and most effective means of maintaining decorum. Her palaces lacked plumbing. Bathing, when it occurred, was a logistical endeavor involving wooden tubs, heated water carried in buckets, and at least 3 servants. The effort was so extensive that full immersion became a rare luxury, one prepared for with the same precision as a coronation. Despite this, Elizabeth was regarded as clean by the standards of her time. She owned hundreds of dresses, surrounded herself with fragrant gloves and handkerchiefs, and demanded that every detail of her appearance be immaculate. But it was not a cleanliness of sanitation. It was one of illusion. The queen did not avoid bathing because she was neglectful. She avoided it because water threatened to undo the perfect image she projected to the world. Elizabeth's face is one of the most recognizable in the annals of history. Pale, smooth, nearly spectral. It was more than just makeup. It was policy. In an era that revered white skin as a sign of nobility and divine favor, the queen embraced cosmetics as a shield against scrutiny and as a symbol of authority. Her makeup of choice was Venetian ceruse, a compound of white lead and vinegar. This toxic mixture created the illusion of flawless skin while silently destroying it. Over time, it corroded the queen's face, leaving scars, lesions, and a deepening reliance on thicker and thicker applications. Compounding the damage was her lip color, often made of cinnabar or vermilion containing mercury. This too seeped into her bloodstream, weakening her health, exacerbating mood swings, and causing neurological symptoms consistent with mercury poisoning. Yet she persisted. Why? Because her skin was not merely her own. It was the realm's. Elizabeth used her appearance to hold court, to intimidate rivals, and to deny time itself. She refused to be painted in natural light. Portrait artists were required to use stylized templates, reusing idealized features from earlier paintings. In her final years, her face was nearly a mask, reportedly so fragile that touching it risked it crumbling. Historians debate whether she understood the danger of her cosmetics, but one thing is certain. She believed her image had to remain intact, even if her body failed beneath it. She did not bathe her face often, for to do so would have washed away the mask along with the myth of Gloriana, the Virgin Queen. Behind the finely embroidered tapestries and beneath the gold-leafed ceilings of Elizabethan palaces, an unpleasant truth lurked. There was no plumbing. For all her majesty, Queen Elizabeth I lived in an environment more medieval than modern. The palaces she inhabited, like Hampton Court and Richmond Palace, had no toilets, no sewage systems, and certainly no running water. Instead, human waste was handled through systems that had changed little from the Middle Ages. The Queen's own private toilet, or clothes stool, was an ornate cushioned chair with a hole cut in the seat, beneath which a ceramic chamber pot was placed. This pot had to be emptied, cleaned, and perfumed multiple times a day, not by anonymous servants, but by one of the most trusted and prestigious officials at court, the groom of the stool. Despite its name, the groom of the stool was not a lowly attendant but rather a nobleman of high standing, chosen for discretion and loyalty. He had unmatched access to the queen during her most private moments. He assisted with dressing, hygiene, and even political discussions. To be appointed groom of the stool was an honor and a strategic position of influence within the court. Beyond the queen's chamber, the reality of waste management was far less ceremonious. The entire palace operated on a system of chamber pots and cesspits. Servants, often called gong farmers or night soilmen, were tasked with removing the waste under cover of darkness, carrying heavy pails through narrow corridors, down staircases, and across courtyards to be dumped in designated trenches or pits. These cesspits, often located just outside the palace walls or even below certain rooms, were foul-smelling, disease-ridden, and frequently overflowing. The smell of court life was an ever-present challenge. In an effort to mask the stench, herbs such as lavender, rosemary, and sweet marjoram were scattered on floors or burned as incense. Rushes were spread over the floorboards and perfumed with oils, but these rushes were not changed regularly. Beneath them accumulated layers of dirt, hair, food scraps, and unspoken filth. Even the queen's movements were strategic to avoid unpleasant odor. She traveled frequently between royal residences, not only for political purposes but also to escape the inevitable buildup of waste. Without plumbing, no amount of elegance could keep a palace fresh for long. The longer the court stayed in one location, the worse the smell and the health conditions became. For all its opulence, Elizabeth's court was a world of paradoxes, where perfumes masked decay, where velvet-lined seats hid chamber pots, and where the most powerful woman in the realm lived side by side with the unshakable odor of humanity. To fully understand Queen Elizabeth I's hygiene habits, one must first understand her relationship with control. Everything about her body, from her powdered face to her gloved hands, was a symbol not of beauty but of command. And nowhere was this more evident than in her avoidance of bathing. Water was not just inconvenient in the Tudor era. It was intimate. To bathe meant to bare one's body, to soften one's skin, to invite both disease and vulnerability. And Elizabeth, who had seen women destroyed by weakness, including her own mother and Boleyn, could not afford to seem fragile. Instead of cleansing with water, Elizabeth enveloped herself in a daily ritual of perfumed armor. She was surrounded by custom-blended concoctions made in the palace's still rooms. Lavender, rose, orris root, cloves, and rosemary steeped in vinegar or spirits. These liquids were not meant to remove dirt but to mask scent and reinforce her untouchable image. A daily dabbing of rosewater on the wrists, a quick spritz behind the ears, and the queen would glide through her court, leaving behind not sweat, but a carefully constructed aura. She carried scented pomanders, ornate, orb-shaped accessories filled with resins and herbs, tucked into her bodice or attached to her belt. When unpleasant smells overwhelmed her, she simply lifted them to her nose and breathed in curated cleanliness. These were not only functional but symbolic. They signaled her distance from the common world, where cleanliness was fought with water and soap. For Elizabeth, fragrance was more than a preference. It was a boundary. Even her clothing was part of this sensory strategy. Her gloves were perfumed, her handkerchiefs embroidered and soaked in aromatic oils. The queen's garments, heavy and layered, served both to hide the body and preserve its scent. She was known to gift perfumed gloves to favored courtiers, a way of sharing her controlled scent with others, never the source. Hair washing was out of the question. Her hair, often concealed under elaborately styled wigs, was powdered and stiffened with sugar water or egg whites. When her natural hair began to thin from age or lead poisoning, she wore auburn wigs carefully scented and curled to perfection. But beneath all the lavender and powder, the queen's body aged. Her skin, damaged by years of lead-based cosmetics, became fragile and marred. Rumors circulated of open sores, flaking patches, and a face that could no longer withstand touch. And yet, she never abandoned her rituals. She doubled down on them. As she aged, Elizabeth became increasingly private, even paranoid. She refused to have her image painted unless the portrait followed strict guidelines. No wrinkles, no signs of decay. She banned mirrors from her private quarters. Some claimed she had a chambermaid whose sole responsibility was to reapply powder to her shoulders when no one else was looking. The mask of the monarch could not crack, not even in solitude. Bathing, then, was not simply avoided out of ignorance or laziness. It was rejected because it represented too much reality. A bath would reveal the body, its weakness, its decay. It would risk removing the powder that shielded her. It would expose the queen as human, and Elizabeth had spent her reign convincing the world she was something more. In her later years, the queen carried a scented walking stick which she would raise delicately while passing particularly pungent courtiers. It was not just about avoiding unpleasantness. It was a subtle performance, a reminder of the line between sovereign and subject. Her body was no longer simply hers. It was an extension of the crown. Cleanliness in Elizabeth's world was not about health. It was about image. An image was everything. Queen Elizabeth I remains one of history's most iconic monarchs, not because she was pristine, but because she understood better than anyone the power of illusion. Her hygiene habits were not accidental. They were deeply rooted in a world that equated purity with stillness, ritual with control, and image with identity. To bathe often was to risk the mask, and Elizabeth could not allow it to slip. So instead, she powdered, she perfumed, she posed, and in doing so, she transformed herself into something larger than life. Something unwashed, perhaps, but undeniably unforgettable. In the royal court of Elizabeth I, cleanliness was not a matter of soap and water. It was a matter of survival.